So let's talk about how discipline, in Sanskrit tapas, can take your yoga practice, and if you're a yoga teacher, to the next level. Yoga comes from India, and traditionally it's a very disciplined practice. And Asia, and I'm talking about India and Japan and China, the culture's a little different. They believe, philosophically, that the more discipline you can fit into your life, the more peace of mind you experience. In the West, outside of India, America and Europe and Australia, we have a different consciousness. It's the more leisure time or the more vacations we can go on, we'll experience more peace of mind. Now we can combine the two. Discipline of the East and the luxury of the West, bring them together. It can be a magic combination. And one of the concepts I believe that's misinterpreted by Western yoga teachers is the whole concept of yoga's about love and unity and acceptance, and we love each other and nobody's wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that approach. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying it's definitely not traditional. The serious yoga teachers in India, and I'm not just talking about our lineage, I'm not just talking about Ghosh and Bikram. I'm talking about Iyengar, Pattabhi Jois, Krishnamacharya, very disciplined teachers. The traditional way of teaching Hatha Yoga 100 years ago was completely different than it is now, interpreted in the West. I'm not saying everybody's misinterpreting it. I'm just talking about the tradition. I'm talking about the foundation where it came from India. One thing that I'll talk about in the Barkan Method teacher training programs is give the students what they need, not what they want. As a yoga teacher, if you're just trying to be nice all the time, oh, don't worry about it. Don't push too much. If you need to take child pose, take child pose. Oh, it's okay. I want you to like me. Therefore, I'm not going to push you. Or I'm not going to take you to the next level. Maybe they'll like you more. Maybe they'll want to go out to lunch with you, but they're not going to come back the next day, pay you $25 to teach them the class when they're not getting the results. So you want to give the students what they need, not necessarily what you may think they want, just so that you're a popular teacher. I mean, there was nobody more popular than Bikram, and he was extremely tough, especially in the beginning. So let's go back to the beginning of Bikram. Don't forget, if you're enjoying this video, hit the like button and subscribe and share it with your friends. When Bikram first came to the United States, he taught the class in a different way. And I did the same thing. When I opened my studio in 1983 in Fort Lauderdale, I taught a different class. Anybody that was around in that time, I'm sure you will back me up, because it was a more disciplined practice. But then what happened was both of us sort of adapted to Western society and consciousness, because the more lenient that I got, the less I stopped pushing the discipline side of the practice, the more the population of my classes begin to grow. But that's as a teacher. But as a student, you can choose to be more disciplined in your practice. Doesn't matter what the intention the teacher has. So let's talk about, as a yoga student, how you can be more disciplined in your practice and why that will benefit you. Now, if you're a yoga student in the hot yoga world, Bikram, Barkan, Ghosh yoga, and there's the heat factor, and you're new to the practice, and there's a lot going on, it's very hard to take this concept, because you're just trying to survive the class. You're just trying to figure out how much energy you can put forth to get through a 90-minute, 75-minute class. This is more for the experienced student, the intermediate to the advanced, and definitely to the ultra-advanced level, because the tradition of doing yoga practice is to let the body relax after the contraction. I talked about it recently in a couple other videos. Contraction, relaxation. We contract the body in the particular area that the body is targeting in that pose. When we release out of it in Samastitihi, what's also nicknamed Tadasana, or if we're on the floor, Shavasana, that's the relaxation part. That's when we're able to manipulate the blood and oxygen into those target areas. But in between, this is what I'm talking about. This is now the in-betweens. In-betweens, you want to stand at attention, relaxed, or in Shavasana, no movement. So we want to start to eliminate all the extra movement. So as you become more advanced, and this is your motto, economy of motion, no extra movement. And if you're interested in being a Barkan Method teacher, I put links down in the description below. You can apply, we can set up a Zoom meeting, and I can give you a preview of what the training is like, online and live as well. When I was doing my teacher training program back in 1980, 1981, into 1982, Bikram's younger brother, Buddha, had come from Japan. He was living in Japan. He had a Japanese wife, and he lived in Tokyo. And so he was used to that disciplined consciousness of the Far East. So he came to Beverly Hills and taught us a class in 1981, and he kicked our asses. I mean, first of all, he was very appalled at the the sloppiness in the way we were practicing yoga, because for him, you had to be standing at attention between each pose, do not even think about moving. Forget about touching your water. Now, like I said before, I'm not saying as a teacher you should teach this way, because you may not have that much of a popular class. You're going to have maybe a few very, very disciplined students, but you might not be able to pay your rent. So this is something you can put in your brain as an advanced student, and you can do in your own practice no matter what the teacher's doing. So standing at attention in between economy of motion and actuality, you'll have more energy for the pose when you're not doing so much extra movement. Let's look at the eagle pose, for example. A lot of times people go nuts trying to get into the position. Let's take a look at cat. Now let's look at the more advanced version, right to it, arms and legs in one motion, no extra movement. So watch Julia. Here she goes. Arms overhead. Nice and slow. Boom. There it is. Perfect position. That's the advanced application. Think of the yoga posture as a beginning, middle, and end. So here's the in-betweens I'm talking about. Coming into the pose, there's a consciousness that you want to have. For example, full locust pose. If you jerk up into that position, your body's going to contract, and you think you can get higher by going into a fast jerking motion. That may happen, but most likely your body's going to contract and you're not going to go as far. It's harder to come up slower, but if you come up slower, your body will expand and accept the position, and you'll be able to go to a much further height. Now, any of you are used to taking my class, and by the way, if you're interested in taking a Barkan class, down in the description below, there's a link to the Barkan Method on-demand membership. You get a 7-day free trial. But if you're used to my class, you'll know sometimes in locust, when we do both legs up, I will start to count at the end. I'll say 7, 8, 9, 9.5, 9 3/4, 10. And the reason why I do that is because if you're not disciplined, you're going to collapse at 9, 9.5. But if you're more disciplined, you will float down at 12. So let's talk about the ballerinas. So let's talk about classical dancers. Classical dancers are so beautiful and graceful when they're on stage. Every single movement is watched by the audience. The beginning and the end is just as graceful. So it's the same thing in a yoga pose. You want to come up slowly and gracefully, and you want to lower down slowly and gracefully. Look at the gymnasts. The gymnasts, when they do their dismount from their event, that is judged so there's no extra movement. Take one little step or 2 steps, that's a deduction. So no extra movement. Now my teacher's teacher, Ghosh, according to Bikram, also extremely strict. Bikram would say to us all the time, "You're lucky you never met my teacher." And I say that to my students as well. Because my teacher was a lot more strict than I am, and Ghosh was much more strict than Bikram was. So a couple of stories that Bikram would tell me about Ghosh. Sometimes he would have a big stick behind his chair, and it would just be sitting there. And if a student came up to Ghosh and said, "Look, I really can't do this pose because my leg is hurting me," all the other students that knew Ghosh said, "Uh-oh," and they would sort of back away because they knew something was up. And Ghosh would reach behind his chair, pull out a stick, and smack him on the other leg and say, "Now you're even. Now you can do the pose." Now, once again, I'm not advocating Ghosh's actions. I'm just telling you where it comes from in the tradition. Another story Bikram used to tell about Ghosh is that in his gymnasium, he had a whole gymnasium, and sometimes it was connected to the outdoors, and it wasn't like these beautiful yoga schools that we have now in the West, where we have pink walls, and we have beautiful flooring, and we've got teak walls with recessed lighting. In Calcutta, it was very, very different. It was a lot more rugged, and sometimes snakes would come into the yoga room or the yoga hall, wherever it was, and Ghosh would carry a gun on occasion to make sure that the snake didn't bite anybody and shoot the snake in the yoga room. But then Bikram was saying that Ghosh would take the gun, point it at his student's knee, and say, "Lock the knee, lock the knee." So you don't think that student You don't think that student's going to freak out. Now, again, I'm not advocating these actions. I'm just trying to translate to you where it comes from. It comes from a tradition that's a lot more strict, a lot more rigid, especially in the way we're teaching it in the West. And again, as a yoga teacher, you're going to make a decision how you want to teach the class, how strict you want to be. As a yoga teacher that's newer, sometimes people can be more strict than others. I'm just saying, bringing in the discipline, bringing in that tone to the classroom is more traditional, and it can be, if it's done properly, if it's executed properly, it can be a lot more beneficial, because when we have less movement, when we have economy of motion, you're going to be able to go a lot further in the position because you're going to save energy. So no matter if the teacher is strict in discipline or if this teacher is a lot more casual in their approach and they don't really enforce the discipline, you as a student can choose to be more disciplined in your practice. So when you bring in less movement in between, economy of motion, it will enhance your practice because you're saving energy. It's actually going to be easier on your body and your mind when you're standing in between with less movement. So like I said before, discipline in Sanskrit is tapas. Tapas is the third niyama. Tapas is my favorite niyama because it's more related to what we do as hot yogis. It literally means to purify metal through fire. So we're on our yoga mats and we're purifying our bodies through the discipline, through the practice, through the austerity, to purify our bodies to reach that golden state, or what they say in Hatha Yoga, the Vajradeha, the diamond body. I don't mean the diamond body like you're the most perfectly advanced person ever. The diamond body means that your aura is brightened because the physical and the ethereal body are coming together in this wonderfully balanced place. So we're on our yoga mat, through our discipline, through the austerity. Now, the historians say that they really didn't even call the standing postures yogic asanas until about 100, 125 years ago. Back then, they would call the standing postures tapas, because the yogi would stand on one leg, for example, in honor of his teacher, to show his discipline to the teacher, to show his loyalty to the teacher. He'd stand, let's say, in tree pose for a long, long period of time. That's his tapas. That's his discipline, showing his teacher his devotion. Now, you've heard me talk about before, in the old days, they hadn't even really invented yoga mats until the mid-1980s, late 1980s. Back then, we did yoga on the freaking carpet. You can imagine how that carpet would smell. It was just absolutely horrible. So there's a company called Hugger Mugger, somewhere in the mid-80s, and maybe late 80s, they created the yoga mat. And they would send us these big bundles. We'd have to cut them. We'd measure them 16 feet. I don't know what that is in centimeters, 16 feet. And we would cut it and sell it to our student. But what did they call those mats that first came out in the 80s? They called them tapas mats, because on our mat, through our discipline, through the austerity, we will purify our body. We will purify the physical and ethereal body to reach the Vajradeha, the diamond body. So as a yoga teacher, you have to decide how much discipline you want to enforce in your classroom. I was a lot more strict because I think I was overcompensating and just being a newbie. As I got more experience, I demanded the discipline just by being in the room, just by being in my presence. They respected me having that experience as a teacher. So you have to decide how much discipline you want to enforce in your classroom. If you are a teacher, remember, if it's too much, then your classes may not be that popular. People in the West don't necessarily take to extreme discipline class. I like to say in my teacher training programs, make yoga your priority, not necessarily the discipline, but you can combine the two together. And if you're a student, if you're a yoga student, don't worry about how the teacher is teaching his class. You can add the discipline to your practice no matter what. Being a samastitihi, standing position between each pose, not moving as much. Being in shavasana after the floor poses and not moving too much. You have to make that decision on how you want to practice. And at the advanced and the ultra advanced level, this I believe should be a must. No extra movement. So that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hit the notification bell, and smash the like button. It gets out to so much more people and it really boosts us up in the algorithm. And I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye, everyone.